Assalamualaikum and welcome to Micropad. This is the website created by Group 5 that consists of 5 beautiful students. This website can provide you some knowledge regarding demand, supply and government policies in microeconomics. You can access it for your revision for the upcoming test, or you can just gain some new knowledge that probably useful for your future, anywhere and anytime. Just to let you know, this website is easily and creatively created by using Wixsite. On the menu, there are some buttons that can lead you to the nodes such as demand, supply and government policies, taxes effect, elasticity and tax incidence, and last but not least, the list of the team members. Without further ado, I will let my group member to share to all of you about some information regarding this website.
We also would like to introduce you about how we manage to explain the price ceiling using the past example. First of all, we give out the definition of price controlling in terms of price ceilings and price floor. As you can see here, we use the easy term to make sure our client fully satisfied with our website presentation. In this section, we provide the effect on market outcomes when price each good hit the ceiling price. We highlight the most killing effect. One of the effects is price ceiling will lead to a shortage if the quantity of demand was over the quantity of supply. We also tell our client about chronology of cost and reason how price ceilings can occur. We also not forget to include graph in our explanations. It can give a strong impact on our client, especially students. Other than facts, we also provide good situation case as examples to make sure our client see beyond everything. It also a practice to ensure the understanding of our client. As you can see here, the price of flour was changing after the government intervention is involved.
Thank you to NURUL IZZAH. My name is EIZZEITTY BINTI MOHAMAD FREZER. Now I will proceed the presentation with my part, which is price flow notes. How price flow affect market outcome? When the government impose a price flow, two outcomes are possible. There are two outcomes possible on price flow. The first is price flow that is not binding, and the second is a price flow that is binding. The price floor is not binding if set below the equilibrium price. The price floor is binding if set above the equilibrium price, leading to a surplus. Other than that, a binding price floor causes a surplus because quantity surplus greater than quantity demand. For example, the minimum wage. Next, minimum wage is the lowest price possible for labor that any employees may pay. So that's all from me. I pass to next presenter, FITRIYAANI.
Thank you to EIZZEITTY. Before I'm explaining about my point, let me introduce myself first. My name is FITRIYAANI binti ROSLI. Now, I will explain about the tax effect, which is the tax effect on the seller, the tax effect on the buyer, and the tax effect on the seller and the buyer are the same. The effect of the tax is that the government collects taxes to increase revenues for public projects. Tax imposed by the government on an item. There are three tax effects. The first, the tax effect on the seller, the tax effect on the buyer, and lastly, the tax effect on the seller and the buyer are the same. Next, the tax effect on the seller will involve the cost of production, which will shift to the left because it wants to reduce the supply of goods, while the tax effect on the buyer will affect the price increase of a goods and the demand curve will shift to the left. The difference between a seller and a buyer is that the tax imposed on the buyer is more burdened than the seller, but both of them will be burdened due to the tax imposed by the governments. Last but not least, the tax effect on the sellers and the buyers will change a new turning point where quantity decreases and price increases. So that's all from me. Now I will pass to ZAINAL. Thank you.
Thank you to FITRIYAANI. My name is Muhammad Zainal FITRI bin Muhammad ZAKRI. Now I will explain about the elasticity and tax incidence. So, what is elasticity? Elasticity is an economic measure of how sensitive an economic factor is to another. For example, changes in price to supply or demand, or changes in demand to changes in income. So, if demand for a good or service is relatively static, even when the price changes, demand is said to be inelastic and its coefficient of elasticity is less than 1.0. So, examples of elastic goods include clothing or electronics, while inelastic goods are items like food and prescription drugs. So, what is tax incidence? Tax incidence describes a case when buyers and sellers divide a tax burden. So the tax incident will also lay out who bears the burden of a new tax, for instance, among producers and consumers or among various class segments of a population. So the elasticity of demand of a good can help understand the tax incident among parties. So how does the tax incidence work? It depicts the distribution of the tax obligations, which must be covered by the buyer and seller, at the level at which each party participates in covering the obligations, shift based on the associated price elasticity of the product or service in question, as well as how the product or service is currently affected by the principles of supply and demand. So, tax incidents reveal which group consumers or producers will pay the price or burden of a new tax. For example, the demand for prescription drugs is relatively inelastic. Despite changes in costs, its market will remain relatively constant. Now, we go to the effect of tax depending on the elasticity. So, the impact of a tax depends on the elasticity of demand. So, if demand is inelastic, a higher tax will cause only a small fall in demand. So, most of the tax will be passed on to consumers. When demand is inelastic, government will see a significant increase in their tax revenue. So, this is an example of the effect of tax on elastic demand. So, consumer burden of tax rise, then producer burden of tax rise, then the tax revenue for the government. Now, we go to the elastic demand. So, as you can see, if demand is elastic, then an increase in price will lead to a bigger percentage fall in demand. So, you can look at the consumer burden of tax rise and producer burden of tax rise, and lastly, the tax revenue for the government. So, for the last section in our website, which is team members, as you can see, the first one is NURUL IZZAH binti ABDUL HALIM. The next one is NURUL IZZEITTY EINI binti Muhammad Ali John FREZER. Next, we go to NURUL FITRIYAANI binti ROSLI. And then Muhammad Zainal FITRI bin Muhammad ZAKRI, which is me. And the last one is Muhammad ZARITHSHA bin YUSLI. So, that's all from our website, from Microeconomics, which is Supply, Demand and Government Policies. So, Assalamualaikum. Thank you and goodbye.